Welcome to I Wish You Could Hear This, where we explore great stories and simple proven steps to help you thrive in life, faith, and relationships.
In our research, we've heard hundreds of hope-filled strategies for marriage, parenting, leadership, and life that are grounded in science and consistent with biblical truth. And now you can hear them too.
I'm Shaunti Feldhahn.
And I'm Jeff Feldhahn.
From brand new marriages to ones that have decades of experience, many marriages arrive at a season where there are real difficulties. Maybe you're struggling with issues like finances or parenting. Maybe you feel like your spouse isn't the same person you met at the altar. Maybe you've experienced that slow slide of disconnection. But what happens when one or both spouses want to throw in the towel? Thankfully, you don't have to abandon what you've built. You can repair what's broken, and that is often the case, even if there is only one person willing to work on the marriage. Lindsey Maestas discovered that very personally and has a wealth of wisdom to share. That is what we are going to talk about today on I Wish You Could Hear This.
Lindsey, thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Oh, thanks, Shaunti. Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited to be here. I feel honored.
Well, we are grateful
We're
that
honored
you're here.
that you're here.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
So let me just introduce you briefly. You're a wife and a mom of two boys. You're a writer, speaker, entrepreneur, and podcast host of Living Easy with Lindsey, which has an audience of more than 3 million listeners. You're also a creator of a marriage course called The Wife Project, From Roommates to Soulmates, to help women worldwide to create connection and find purpose in their relationships. And you just released your book, Don't Burn Your Own House Down. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's been such a cool journey to go through the process, and I have it here, and I feel
That's awesome.
I
love the cover, by the way.
thanks.
I love what they did with
designed
that.
it. We went back and forth for a while, and I tell people God gave me the cover because the covers that were given to me, I was just like, oh, it just doesn't feel like it fits me. And I chose one. It went out to all of the, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everything. And that night I had this cover in a dream. And I went and I wrote my agent. I said, give me 10 minutes on Canva and I want to create it and I'm going to send it to you because God gave me the cover. And I sent it and they were like, oh yeah, we like it better than what we have. And so they kept it. So that's a cool it's
Wow.
a fun part.
Fantastic.
Real plug in there for Canva too.
Yes. Yeah, it was. I mean, we had to go a little more profesh afterwards, but it was so nice. And I feel like it is a long-lived dream. This is something I've wanted to since I was 4 years old, to write a book. But I've always loved encouraging people. I've always loved picking the brains of people and to learn what works for them, what doesn't work for them in life. And I've also been married about 14 years, or I have been married 14 years now. And I have my own experiences, and I wanted to be able to encourage people as a peer to say, hey, you're not alone in the struggles that you're facing. And sometimes we just need to talk about the nitty-gritty stuff of marriage because it can be really hard.
Well, I love that you introduced that because I was going to say, I love a note that you have on your website to say that one of the things you say is that you have one goal in ministry, which is to talk about the things that no one likes to talk about.
Yes.
In order to remind you that you're more than your mess. That is so fantastic. And so just do us a favor and back us up a little bit. Tell us, so that we get everybody on the same page, what led you to start your ministry and ultimately write this new book?
Yeah. So I was postpartum about 9 months. I had severe postpartum anxiety and depression. I thought at that point I was just broken. Like I wasn't meant to be a mom because little things like putting my oldest son in the car seat, I thought I was going to break his bones. And so I wouldn't do it. Like I couldn't do it.
Like
And
severe anxiety.
severe
kind of.
anxiety.
Okay,
Yes.
gotcha.
But at the time, I just thought I'm a horrible mom. I don't know what I'm doing. And my husband would tell me he had to work the next morning and I wouldn't sleep the entire night because I knew he was going to be gone the next day. And until I had a very loving friend who I finally just shared everything with her. And she said, you need to talk to somebody. This is like, you're struggling. You're having a hard time. And at that point, 10, 11 years ago, there was not a lot of communication about these things. It was starting to come out, but I wrote one blog post, and it was more so for myself, like a diary, a journal entry, and it blew up. And it was
Wow.
two moms, and I was just really honest about my experience and thinking like, I don't even know why I became a mom, or here are the struggles. I'm exhausted, but I don't want to miss this. Anyways, I ended up sharing that, and some magazines, digital magazines, started picking it up, and it went, and it was a sign to me that I felt like Jesus was just saying, hey, people want to hear the real stuff, because we have enough filtered, highlight
Mm.
reels all over the internet, and it's only gotten worse. But that became the core of my ministry, is to talk about the mess, but not to stay there, because Jesus doesn't ever keep us stuck. He doesn't ever keep us trapped in condemnation. He frees us. He makes us new. And so my heart is to say, hey, here's our mess. Even in chapter 2, in Don't Burn Your Own House Down, I wrote how I almost burnt my own house down. And I talk about a moment where I was just cradled on the floor in tears because I didn't think I could do this anymore. And it was really vulnerable to share that. But I go back to those beginning days of blogging and podcasting,
Mm.
when I would get emails from people and say, like, I've never heard another person be honest about this. And I felt so alone, or I felt so ashamed. And shame keeps us trapped. The enemy uses it to keep us
Yes.
trapped. And so, yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And I just kept writing and kept writing, and magazines focus on the family, and they started sharing. And then the podcast came, and that has been incredible. And it's always been the goal to write. I want to be an author for the rest of my life. And so this was my debut, but there are many more to come. So,
Oh,
Oh,
that's
that's
great.
great.
yeah. Yeah.
You know, I
So,
love, if I can, you talked about how the podcast, kind of came about as a result of this. The title of the podcast,
mhm.
Living Easy with Lindsey, what you've just described doesn't sound like living is easy.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, can you explain the title a little for me?
Sure. Yeah. So, what I find in a lot of people is that they choose to live in a sense of stagnancy, that
Mm.
they
Mm.
um, accept life on a plateau. And while I believe a lot of life is a plateau, and C.S. Lewis talks about this, we have peaks and then we have valleys, but a lot of our life is lived on the plateau. And I think that's fine, because that's a state of contentment. But I also believe strongly that God does not call us to stay there in certain areas of our lives, that there are seasons in which we're called to live with excellence, but it doesn't always come easily. And so it is a little bit of like a play, because
Mm-hmm.
as I address things, I talk a lot about the difficulty of life and the pain of life. But I believe that true freedom and easy living comes from challenging yourself and taking the risks and becoming the best version of yourself,
Mm.
because it is choose your hard, right? So you can either choose the heart of staying stuck, or you can choose the heart of doing the things you've always dreamt of doing, of having the healthy family, of having children who love the Lord, of taking care of your body and your mind. And so, as I discuss in the podcast, I talk about faith and motherhood and marriage and all of relationships, is that living easy truly comes from living to up to your potential in the freedom of doing the hard work. And
You
so,
know,
yeah, it's
it,
kind of a
it,
play, but yeah, it's been
I love
a
it.
really cool journey. Yeah.
it's interesting that you say that, Lindsay, because what my brain immediately kind of goes to is because literally I just last week was doing a women's retreat for a group of women in Pennsylvania.
Oh, how cool.
And one of the things that I always talk about when we have more time, because like women's conferences, you don't have a ton of time, right? Like it's
Yeah.
usually a pretty busy day, and you talk once or twice and that's it. But at a women's retreat where you're there for a whole weekend, you
Hmm.
can really dig into these things.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always like to raise with the women and then watch how they respond is this idea of living according to God's best for us and living according to our design. And that can be hard. It can take
Hmm.
work.
Hmm.
But I love the way you put it. Choose your heart.
Hmm.
And and the women, it's interesting to see this shift in this aha moment. And you must see that a lot in what you do. And I'd love to take a second and talk about one specific area of aha moment that you really, I think, focus mostly on in your new book, which is the marriage and relationship
Yeah.
side of things.
Yeah.
Because you talk about in the book, you share how you and your husband, I think his name is Jesse.
Yes, Jesse.
Yeah, okay. That you promised when you got married, you would never let the word divorce come up, right? But at one point, you really were ready to kind of call it quits,
Yeah.
right? I would love for the people who are listening to this who are drawn to this topic because of the title of your book and about they don't want their house to burn down, but it feels like it kind of is. Can you talk about that time? Give us a little backstory and get us started by talking about what made you instead not decide not to call it quits, but to choose to work on and try to save the marriage.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I commend you, Shaunti, for having that conversation at the women's retreat. Because I think that complacency is really a trick or tactic of the enemy a lot of the time, because when we're complacent, when we're not in ministry, when we're not speaking truth, when we're not actively living well and with excellence, it's so easy to just come into this almost an idolatry of comfort, to where you worship yourself more than you worship God and what he's called you to, or honoring what he's called you to. And I think that's exactly what happened within my marriage. I often say that marriage is more about being holy than it is happy, but we get that really twisted. And yet in our holiness and in our pursuit of Jesus, he brings us joy, but we get so confused and we get really muddled when we prioritize ourselves and our happiness over something else, or our own comfort even. And so for me, and what I share and how I almost burnt my own house down, and I share this in depth, obviously, in the book, but I had just gotten to a place where I felt alone. We had two very young babies, and I joke, but I'm honest and tell people, like, don't get divorced if you have like a 3-year-old or younger, because your mindset is twisted.
Your brain is not working
Your
at full
brain is
speed at that
not
point.
healthy at the time. You're exhausted. You're completely adjusting to a new season of life. It's a whirlwind. And so, but we had almost a newborn and a toddler, and we were tired. And I just hit a point where I felt like for over a year, I had been navigating life on my own. He was working, he was doing all the things, but he wasn't planning dates. He wasn't showing affection. He wasn't wanting to communicate. And I'm an anxious attacher, which means I need to verbalize my concerns all the time. And he's more avoidant, which means he tries to avoid those conversations at all costs. And it turns into what I call a crazy cycle. And so we just saw all of these things happening, and I was feeling depleted emotionally. And I hit a point that I write about where I just was like, I can't live like this anymore. And more than wanting to honor the commitment I made, more than wanting to honor the ministry I had been building, more than wanting to honor Jesus, I wanted to feel better. Like, I just wanted to feel good. And we live in a world where it confuses us, because as we grow up, we watch these Disney movies, and it's like, oh, it's this fairy tale. Marriage is a fairy tale and nothing ever goes wrong. But we don't realize it is work. And we focus more on the wedding day than on what's to come in preparation for the marriage. And I had even prepared for marriage mentally with premarital counseling and speaking to a lot of people, because I was already in this world a little bit. And even that, it was still hard to get out of the mindset of, I don't deserve this. And what I came to with that, I did pack my bags, I did leave. We've been so fortunate to have a really solid group of people, which I tell every couple, you need a community. I would not be married anymore if it weren't for friends letting me cry on their floor in the middle of the night, or call them and have these conversations. we need a village of people who are for Jesus and for our marriage.
Yeah.
Obviously, be cautious with who you choose. They need to be for you. But we were able to spend that time apart with those people. And more than anything, I think what was reassuring was just hearing from others that they said, oh, we went through that. We were there. We did that. It sucked and it was hard, but we navigated it. And here's what Jesus taught us through it. And here's where we are now. And I think a lot of the time we miss that mark, that growth can be really painful, that discomfort isn't necessarily bad, but that it's a warning sign or a red flag to say, hey, some work needs to be done. And so we decided if we marry someone else, we're going to have just more issues with another person, or different issues
Choose
with
your hard,
Right.
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
choose your hard.
exactly.
Different
Right.
issues with a different person, plus baggage and kids from our relationship is going to be a lot. And we love each other. We really do love each other so much. But that doesn't mean marriage is easy. And when we get out of this mindset of me, I worship myself and my happiness, we are able then to be more like Jesus. He came not to be served, but to serve. And I talk in chapter 3, Make the Dane Coffee. I think it's chapter 3 or 4. I'm sorry. I should know that. But
It's
one of
fine.
those.
We
Yeah.
have the same questions all the time.
Okay. It's one of those.
Where was that? Yeah.
But Make the Dane Coffee, and I talk about, I'm looking now so that I can see, but I talk about my grandma. It is chapter 3. My grandma, and I had asked her before she passed, I was always asking these questions, but I said, you've been married for over 50 years and you guys seem so genuinely happy. Like, of course they bicker, but they were so happy and playful even still. And I asked her what her secret was. And she said, compete with one another. And this on my Instagram, Living Easy with Lindsey, went mega viral. And I think it's because we just need to hear something that gets us outside of ourselves sometimes. And her advice, what she meant with compete with
I
one
was just
another.
going to say, what did she mean by
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
She meant outserve one another. And this is biblical, outdo one another in showing honor. But she would say, I would wake up and I would go out on a Saturday and I'd wash your grandpa's car. And he would see that. And he would come in and he'd bake me, we're Czechoslovakian, he would bake me kolaches. And that's like our breakfast, like a pastry kind of dessert. And I would see him doing that. He loved to bake, but I would see him doing that. And I would go and iron his clothes. And then he would see that and he would go and garden for me. And it was never mean-spirited. It was always kind. And it was always intentional to serve the other. And she's like, of course it didn't always look like this. Sometimes I would go out and wash the car and he couldn't do anything else. But it was the act of constantly serving one another. We competed with one another in loving the other. Like how much... Oh, go ahead.
You know what I was going to say? What's so interesting about that is that fits so perfectly with what we found in one of our research projects on what makes happy marriages.
Tell me.
Because we did this big study of what are the things that are common to most of the happy marriages, big nationally representative sample, all the things. And one of the things we found, we ended up calling it like, you've always heard not to keep score, but the happiest couples, they do keep score. They just keep score of what the other person is giving. They notice, like you said.
Yeah, that's so good.
And I wanna, can we dive into a practical
Sure.
question?
Yeah.
I mean,
I'd love to ask this. So,
Yeah.
as you know, and as Shaunti just described, we're social researchers. So we're always trying to dig out what are the little things that make the big difference in a person's relationship. Yeah. So I was intrigued by two things you said about the book. You said this book is as much about self-discipline as it is about marriage. And you said that the small 1% habits change everything. Tell us what you mean by those things.
I am so excited to hear what you say right now. I'm like, I want to get a pen and write down what you say. I'm going to have to re-listen to this.
Well, I really love this question first and foremost. So thank you for a great question so far. But there's one chapter called Your Mind and Body Glow Up. And what you'll see in that chapter and throughout the book is the reality that you cannot fix your partner. Think about how difficult it is to change your own patterns. And then now you're not only trying to do that because it's already so difficult on you, you're trying to do it with somebody else who was raised differently than you, has different experiences, different patterns. So the core of my ministry as a whole is you can only focus on yourself.
Love
But
that.
a
Okay.
lot of the time when we have that self-discipline, when we First Peter 3 says, as wives, live in such a way that without even speaking a word, you set an example to your husband, that both men and women are called to love one another well and to honor the Lord. And when we're both doing that faithfully and we're both pursuing him faithfully, the fruit flows down into both of us and into the relationship.
Mhm.
And so in your mind and body glow up, I asked the question at the beginning, if you were newly single tomorrow, say newly divorced, would you change the way you're living? Would you start
Mm.
working out more? Would you start connecting with friends and family? Would you be more adventurous? Would you take better care of your mental health, or at least try? Would you glow up, right? We always see this divorce glow up on social media. And my question is, why are we doing that after our marriage has ended? Why are we
Great
not trying to
question.
become the best version of ourselves within our relationship? Our spouse has committed their entire life to us. Do they not then deserve the most exceptional version of us? And this is something I talk about all the time with myself, with my husband, is Lord willing, I am the only wife he has. I want to be exceptional at that role. I want to do it well. I want to give him the best wife he could ever have, emotionally, sexually, spiritually, as a mother, all of the things, as a partner in the home. I want to keep growing. And I think that is why I challenge so many people throughout the book, not only in that chapter, but to say, hey, where are the areas in which you are doing the work for yourself instead of pointing the finger? I speak with a lot of divorced couples, and there's one thing that has really stuck out to me is when they finally get that divorce, they always say, the reality is that when you are alone in your new place or wherever, and you look in the mirror at your relationship, or you look back at your relationship, the only thing at that point that you can see are the things you could have done better, because you no longer, a lot of, and of course, this is not speaking about abuse. I'm not talking about abuse,
Of
emotional,
course.
physical abuse, or betrayal. I'm talking about these irritations. Frustrations between two sinners trying to come together to create something good. But when they are alone, they say, oh my gosh, I could have done this. I was so lazy, or I didn't take good care of myself, because they don't have access to that person, their old spouse anymore, to point the fingers at. But what they can see are the areas in which they could have changed. So
Well,
my heart with Don't Burn Your Own House Down is, hey, let's do that work before the marriage falls apart, before you burn the house down. If you light a little flame of resentment and bitterness, are you doing the work to put it out by seeking the Lord and his heart for forgiveness? If you're feeling really uncomfortable and insecure in your skin and you're not allowing intimacy to be a part of your marriage, what are you doing to change that thing? So I think it's a really important mindset. My husband always says, when you're pointing one finger, you have three pointing back at you. And I always think of it that way. When I am looking at a person, I mean, this is biblical as well, look at the log in your own eye.
Right.
And when I find myself frustrated and irritated at Jesse, a lot of the time I have to step back and say, hey, am I going on my walks? Am I doing Pilates, or am I spending time with friends, or am I expecting this entire what we once relied upon a village for stability, friendship, financial stability, emotional connection, intimacy? Am I expecting all of this from him, or am I also expecting, like, leaning onto Jesus for that thing? And so with that said, focus on self. The 1% shift, this is from the book Atomic Habits, which is one of my favorite books ever. It is so phenomenal. But
let me interrupt you to say that
yes, please.
anything about Atomic Habits and you read
Uh,
Tiny Habits, like
yeah,
yes,
we're fans in this
Yeah.
household
of
Yes,
of those
love
books,
that.
and
Yes.
particularly Atomic
and
Habits.
the 1% idea. Okay, so
Yes.
back to the 1%,
Yeah.
the little
Well, in the
things.
1%, it ties into everything in our lives. And I tell people this because a lot of us feel stuck. We feel trapped in, whether it's in a marriage or in parenthood or in a career. And the reality is that we're as trapped as we allow ourselves to be, because so much of it is personal growth. While yes, there are certain situations in which we can't fully get out of, we can shift perspective. And so the 1% shift is when you're black and white. If say you are a black and white thinker and you think, okay, I need to lose 30 pounds. And so I have to work out every day. But then by day 3, you haven't lost any weight. So you just give up. And that is so common within a marriage. We start to see the issues, the frustrations, and we're like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to serve him." And then he doesn't respond in the way that I want him to. Or I'm going to pursue him with intimacy and he doesn't want to that night. So I'm never doing it again. Or he doesn't unload the dishwasher like I asked him to, so our marriage is over. A lot of these little things create big resentments that can lead to contempt. But if you think of it as the 1%, where you say, okay, a 1% shift every day, even the smallest amount of growth leads to an upwards trajectory. That is a benefit. That is a plus. So you're not going to see the grand scale all at once. But if you start to see 1% shifts, it can make a big difference. One thing I tell couples is if you were to greet your spouse at the door every single day for 2 weeks, you do not hand them a kid. You do not hand them a laundry basket. You look them in the eyes. You ask them, how are you? You give them a 6-second kiss. The Gottmans say it releases oxytocin, or researchers. It releases oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. And you look one another in the eyes. You show the other person you prioritize them. I guarantee your marriage would feel at least 1% different at the end of that 2-week period, even at the end of the first day.
I
Greet
love
one
that.
another at the
I
door.
love that.
So, a question. I mean, kind of. I'm wanting to get a little bit. You've been really practical here on that.
Yeah.
That's really great. So let's just say hypothetically, Shaunti and I have a real disagreement,
Yes.
and the emotional tension is real, and
Yeah.
the potential for resentment
Is there?
on my side or
Yeah.
on her side is there.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you would, for a couple that might be like us or like that situation, what could I do in the moment that is kind of a 1%
thing. Well, and here is the image that you shared earlier, which I think is a good one. You've lit a match. You got a little flame of resentment
Yep.
that you can feel it in yourself. Are you going to put it out, or are you going to risk it growing and starting to burn your house down? So using that analogy, what would you say is an example of a 1% thing?
Yeah. So if you're navigating resentment, bitterness, frustration, I think obviously if you're trying to smother the flame, one of the first things that you can do is communication with one another. Stonewalling is going to create more resentment. Silent treatment will create more resentment, but you communicate in a time that is not, it's not bedtime. You're not still frustrated. You give space and you watch your tone, that you come to one another and say, I feel as if this is happening. It is possible the other person will still be resentful. I am a huge advocate of talking with other people through your biggest issues. I know this is like really bizarre to some people, but the majority of the biggest fights that Jesse and I have had, we go to a respected mentor or counselor that we will navigate through. Because if we realize we're cycling through and we're on the 3rd round of this resentment, something is not shifting. We're not hearing one another. Another thing that I really
So can I
encourage.
interrupt you
Oh,
for a
yes,
second?
please.
So
Yeah.
your example is to go to a friend who's basically like, hey, this is this situation. I'm thinking this. He's thinking this. Am I missing something? Who's right? Like
Well,
you're
it's not.
basically asking a mentor to be, what is that insurance commercial where it's like, okay, we're going to do an instant replay.
Oh, yeah.
Throw
Yeah.
the red flag.
Well, I think a lot of it is outside perspective for somebody to be like, well, a lot of the time is that you're mishearing one another. You're not hearing, you're communicating. And when we communicate, it's, I want this from you. I want this from you. But what the person in the middle sometimes can hear is the heart. Like, and it gives you the ability, and this is something I say a lot in communication, is what I hear from you is this, before you respond or react. What I hear from you is you're feeling this, because most people take the other person's frustration as an attack. Like, this is an attack on my character, and therefore I am wrong and I'm a failure, so I might as well give up. But usually the other person is trying to communicate an unspoken hurt or need or longing within the relationship. If it's the dishwasher, it's not usually the dishwasher. It's wanting somebody who's willing to consider you and take a small burden off of your shoulders. So I think that that's a portion of it. But I will also say, as resentment continues to build, a lot of that is a lack of forgiveness and a lack of vulnerability. So the lack of forgiveness stems from thinking, you haven't earned my forgiveness. You have failed me in this way, and therefore I get to hold this over you. But as we say, a lack of forgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's suffocating you. It's harming you. And so what are the areas in which you can evaluate, hey, I am bitter toward this person and I've not let this go. Even if they haven't asked for forgiveness, we're not called to only forgive if they've asked for it, because we see all that Jesus has forgiven us of. So when
Great
we've been
point.
forgiven of much, how can I withhold forgiveness from the other person? Who am I to do that? I am so small, and God has forgiven me of immense amounts. So I can't withhold that from that other person.
So in yours and Jesse's case,
Yeah.
the 1% habit is, look, we talk with another party. For someone
That's
else, that may
fascinating.
be
That's a
a
great
different
idea.
different thing, but you
Yeah.
consistently do it and apply it, and that keeps that resentment, or it kind of lessens it, and
Yeah.
eventually, you can catch that even as it's building. Go ahead.
So I want to dive a little further into this
Mm-hmm.
sort of concept, if you don't mind, because one of the things that I think we need to acknowledge, and this is kind of a sensitive point, it's a pretty
Yeah.
sensitive point, but you're describing a situation where both you and Jesse are willing to go to a mentor and say, help us out here. Like, and if there's goodwill there, there's, you
Trust, all of
trust
that.
and,
Yeah.
all that. But I'm sure many people who have been in your situation, like you and Jesse were, maybe they're in that situation now. They feel like their house is on fire
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
They may feel like they're the only ones working on it and the
Mm-hmm.
other person is checked out or whatever. And you say something really, really important, and we only have a few minutes here, but I'd like to at least touch on this in our last few minutes, because I think you share a really sensitive but really important perspective. You say, if your marriage feels like a house on fire, you have to be willing to do the hard work to extinguish the flames and help your spouse, even if it means coming out with burns of your own.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really important and very sensitive but very important comment. And then you say, even if they are the one who caused most of the damage, you do what it takes to save what you've built together. And wow, that is such an important statement. In our last few minutes here, can you unpack that statement for us and share what you mean? Because I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some people who are getting their back up and are,
Yeah.
a little
Get their
concerned
sleep.
about that right now.
Yeah.
So can you share what you mean?
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying this isn't to diminish the pain of feeling alone or harmed in a marriage, with emotionally harmed within a relationship. It is so lonely and painful, and I've walked it. There have been seasons that are so tough to fight through. But
Hence the reason that you found yourself curled in a
yeah,
ball,
absolutely.
thinking and
It's not to diminish.
and actually left your marriage.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
because the pain is so extreme sometimes that you feel like, why am I even here? And it is hard for us to understand, but when we begin to unpack the design of marriage itself, that our marriage is for eternity, that our marriage is a ministry, that it is a covenant. Again, it is not necessarily for our joy. Joy is a byproduct of it a lot of the time. This does not mean to suffer. The point of the book is to say, I don't want you suffering. But the reality is, I heard once somebody say, why didn't you ever get divorced? You've been married 70 years. And they said, neither of us wanted a divorce at the same time. And I think that that can honestly, it can honestly be such an honest picture of, and again, we're not wanting you to suffer, we're wanting you to thrive. But sometimes it's like, my husband will be so burnt out and he's like, oh, thinking potentially life would just be so much easier alone, right? Which again, a lot of the time are lies. It's an escape. And when you
Like you
see a
said
divorced
earlier,
family,
choose your hard,
Right.
right?
There's a
you're
You're not
not,
trade-off for
trading
everything.
one hard for
yes.
another. Yeah.
Exactly.
When you see a divorced family, they would tell you this was not the easy option. This was absolutely an excruciatingly painful option a lot of the time. And so I would say, when you're the one who doesn't want the divorce and you want this to work and you want to honor the Lord with your covenant because that's what you committed to for life, because it's a ministry. It shows other people the goodness of God and his presence in our world through your relationship, and your children, they get to see that. That's when you do the hard, holy heart work to say, I'm going to fight for this when my partner is not giving anything. But I also guarantee there are seasons in which your partner is giving a lot when you have 5% to give. And so when you're doing work, and I can even use our own relationship as an example, that there have been times I've been doing the heavy lifting spiritually. He was deconstructing his faith during a season, which thankfully he's committed to the Lord, but he's a pastor's kid and walked through some confusion. And I was the one leading my family. I was praying for our family. I was taking them to church. It was very easy for me to want to become resentful. But in that season, I had to tell myself, this is where God has me. This is where Jesus has me. And if I am going to do anything, and I am going to, if this marriage is going to end, I am not going to allow it to end with me again thinking of all the things I could have done. I'm going to live as a godly wife. I'm not walking into heaven holding my husband's hand. If he's not leading the family, that doesn't mean I get to just throw my hands up. If he's not loving well, it doesn't mean I get to throw my hands up. I am responsible for my faith. I am responsible for my behavior. I am responsible for the way that I live. And therefore, when we take responsibility for ourselves, that usually flows out into the home. And so what that means sometimes is it hurts that you're burnt because you're doing the heavy lifting for your partner. But that is the love of Christ. It's to love unconditionally. And if we do not have love, we have nothing. And so how can we give grace that we expect a lot of the time? How can we give compassion that we expect for ourselves? In what ways are we withholding because they don't deserve it? And how can we look at Jesus and say, Lord, you never withhold from me, and I never, ever deserve it. So this doesn't, again, going back to abuse, I'm not saying accept abuse. Absolutely not. There are biblical outs for abuse, for betrayal. But if you have frustrations and sins causing pain, please do not think that divorce is going to be the give you the ability to say like, oh, I'm so happy and free. You're going to see that person, if you have children together, for the rest of your life.
Right.
So it's not an out, but you are doing the work. And by putting out the little flames and not allowing them to keep growing, you will see that life is so much sweeter when you do the work, because it's sanctifying. It's making you more like Christ every day when you do something hard.
The image that I get when you said that phrase about that, this is part of our calling, is to do the hard work to extinguish the flames, even if it means coming out with burns of your own in order to save, as much as it depends on you, what you've built together.
Yeah.
And what you said about this is like Jesus, I have this image of you're reaching into, the flames that are consuming the house to do some work. But that is what Jesus does. That he came into the flames of our world, so to speak, in order to even though it meant suffering, because of his love for us. And you're right. If we can say, as much as God gives me the power and the ability and the kindness and the grace and the forgiveness, I'm going to do what I can do.
Right.
even to that point of self-sacrifice.
We could unpack that one a
For
whole
that
lot
I was just going to say
more.
that's a whole
But
and
but unfortunately, we're kind of at the end of the tape.
we're
So
wait, that's an old
it's
reference.
an old reference. I'm an old guy. But Lindsey, one thing that I've learned when we've done speaking events and stuff that we've shared is that people can't contain or retain all of the information that's been shared.
Yeah.
And you've shared lots and lots of great stuff, here in this session. If you could say, if I could pick one thing that I want someone to remember, or maybe it's something that I didn't even get a chance to say, if there was one thing that would provide kind of hope, guidance to someone who's in this spot of feeling like their house is burning, what would you want them to take away?
Yeah, I would say that it's not possible without Jesus. I think that we try to do so much of it on our own, and I don't say that in like a cliche way, but we use so much of our own strength, our own power, and it is so quickly depleted because we are self-serving human beings. We want to feel better right away. We live in a time of instant gratification, so when it doesn't feel better immediately, we believe something's wrong. But when we look at Jesus and we look at eternity, it shifts our perspective. We don't have time for petty arguments. Eternity is at hand, right? Like
I
there's
still
so
find that I can multitask on
yeah,
that one.
you
Petty
can.
arguments.
But it's distracting. It's distracting from
It
the
is
ultimate
very
purpose,
much so.
right? And so I think it really is, it's about humility to say, Lord, I don't have it all together. And I'm not perfect in this marriage, though I want my spouse to do everything exactly like me. If they did, it probably wouldn't be great. We balance each other in certain ways. And so it's humility in knowing that you don't have it all together and that you can do more and own it and be playful. We loved dating because we played and we laughed and we did fun things together and we were adventuring or spontaneous or so excited to see each other. We called one another on the phone. We made out like teenagers. Like we did things that it's like a benefit of a relationship, right? It's beautiful. But as logistics and time, we pass like ships in the night, and then our house starts to burn up in flames, and we're like, wait, what happened? You're not praying together. You're not seeking the Lord, and you're not laughing and having fun together anymore. You're just so focused on what's wrong. And so I would say, if I could give anything practical, keep your eyes on Jesus, get in the Word, get in community, have other people around you who are for you, find it. You have to do the work to find it. Secondly, pray over one another every night. Read one chapter of the Bible or even a few verses, and then you each pray. It's very vulnerable, but it is sweet and tender, and they hear your heart in a different way than they ever have. Thirdly, go out and do fun things. Make out with each other on the couch. Do things like get uncomfortable for a little while in order to get comfortable. Experience life together again. Become best friends again. I have a whole chapter about that I love, because that sometimes is all that's missing. You've become too serious. You've become too intense. You've become too focused on the other person. So focus on what you can control yourself and go and find ways to have fun. I think that would be like my takeaway.
Thank you. So
Very
our
good.
listeners are clearly going to go, how do I get more of Lindsey? So how can people find you in your ministry?
Sure. So you can find Don't Burn Your Own House Down anywhere books are sold. I do also narrate the audiobook, and that has been a really cool thing because I was able to add, my own emotion, my own story, some extras within the book. You can find me on Instagram at Living Easy with Lindsey, where I talk a lot about faith-based marriage and motherhood, parenting. And then my podcast, Living Easy with Lindsey, where I discuss all things faith, parenting, relationships, friendships, all of it, marriage. But yeah, anywhere, really, you can find me anywhere. Search my name.
Well, I just want to say thanks, Lindsey. Thanks to Lindsey Maestas for coming on the show today. Check out her book, Don't Burn Your Own House Down. And you can see all these details. We're going to put all the details in the show notes. And we will encourage you, if you feel like there is someone in your life who needs to hear what Lindsey was saying, please share today's episode with them and tag us and tag Lindsey on all your social media channels. Thanks so much, Lindsey, for joining us. Thanks for listening to I Wish You Could Hear This. Remember to subscribe to our podcast. And as always, forward today's audio or video link to a friend, counselor, or pastor who would be encouraged.